Good evening, hello, and thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. So this is part 2 of my review of this very beneficial book titled There Is a God by Anthony Flew. In the first part, I went through the preface of this book written by Roy Abraham Varghese. Actually, I didn't even complete the preface of this book. I started my first video with talking about the significance of Anthony Flew in the history of philosophy, especially the philosophy of religion, and that he wrote extensively and set the basis, the philosophical basis of atheism over a career that extended over a period of 50 years, only to come near the end of his life to dismantle all these philosophical arguments that he was making for the support of atheism, and to start writing in support of theism, in support of deism at least. I'd like to comment on something I mentioned in part 1. I mentioned that Anthony Flew, in his journey back to theism, he reached the point of deism. He reached the point where he believed in the creator of the universe, who is in control of everything, but he did not yet reach a belief in the hereafter or a belief in a specific religion. I said this is okay. This is okay, of course, for somebody who started his journey from atheism, but he did not really complete his journey all the way to getting to know the authentic religion, unchanged religion that is pleasing to this creator, the way of life that is pleasing to this creator that he now believes in. Somebody who reaches that point to know how to please this creator in the right way and how to worship him in the right way has completed the journey. But Anthony Flew started the journey and took a very big step, which is his step towards a very big step towards theism, and he stopped at the point of deism. He now believed in God. That was just before his death. And as I mentioned in part 1, his journey back, which he called the pilgrimage of reason, was not motivated by any specific spiritual experience or any kind of influence by a family member or by any form of organized religion, but it was a philosophical journey, a journey of reasoning, a journey based on science, as he states in his book. We stopped at the point in the preface where Roy Abraham Varghese talks about Dawkins Richard Dawkins being fond of Bertrand Russell, and claiming that he was an opponent of organized religion, while Bertrand Russell, as stated and confirmed by his own daughter, was always in a search for God as well, but he never reached a conclusion on this matter. In the second part of the preface for this book, Roy Abraham Varghese mentioned that Anthony Flew was not the only intellectual person and big philosopher who changed his mind, but other people also did the same. Anyone who is honest enough with himself, sincere and courageous enough to express his beliefs and to follow reason and logic where it leads him without any biases is somebody who should be respected. And the other example Roy gives is the example of J.N. Finlay. J.N. Finlay was also a philosopher who argued for the support of atheism, but then he reversed his position. And he wrote a book in 1970. He called it Ascent to the Absolute, meaning God. In that book and in other books, Finlay argues that mind, reason, intelligence and will culminate in God, the self-existent, to whom is owed worship and unconditional self-dedication. Mind, reason, and intelligence. If we just think about it, the fact that we have minds, the fact that we could reason, we as a creation, we could reason, the fact that we have intelligence, these are not material things. These are concepts that cannot come from atoms, cannot come from molecules, cannot come from material. These concepts, these are higher concepts that can only come from a personal agent who is also intelligent, who also has knowledge, who also has an autonomous will, a volition, who also has reason. Of course, we as Muslims, we only describe God in the terms that are given to us in our holy texts. So we describe God as having knowledge. But when we are arguing and trying to convince atheists, for instance, it is okay to use terms as describing God as a personal agent who has knowledge, who has intelligence, the great mind, the great power that fashioned this universe, that these faculties that we have reflect an entity and an agent that possesses the perfection of these attributes and these qualities, that God would have the utmost knowledge, the utmost wisdom. If we have wisdom, where did this wisdom come from? If we have reason, where did this reason come from? If we have intelligence, if we have a mind, if we could think, where did all this come from except from a greater being who possesses these qualities to an extent that we cannot even fathom. Also in the preface, Roy Abraham Varghese mentions that another atheist, such as Stephen Hawking, and if you read in Stephen Hawking's books, especially the final books, you would conclude that he died as an atheist. But you would find conflicting positions in his writings. Stephen Hawking is quoted by his driver. His name was Saul Pasternak, in the weekly newspaper, the Hebrew weekly newspaper, titled Jerusalem, in the edition of December 2006. This is what he quotes Hawking as saying. When Hawking was asked by his driver if he believed or did not believe in the existence of God, what did Hawking reply? He says that he believed in the existence of God, but that this divine force established the laws of nature and physics, and after that does not enter to control the world. So you can understand from this quotation that Hawking was not a pure atheist, was not a hardcore atheist. And you can see this in other parts of his books, and we will come to other sayings of Hawking that you can find in his books, where he concluded that there is a creator, but then in other parts you can understand that he was an atheist. So there's conflicting views that Hawking Stephen Hawking held at different points in his life or in different books. So he thinks that there is a God who created and fashioned this world, but he does not interfere in this world. Of course, this is not the right position that theists hold. Theists believe that God controls every single thing that moves in this universe. He controls every single atom. He controls every single electron, every single proton, every single quark, every single subatomic particle. Nothing comes into existence or vanishes or moves or stops from moving or performs any kind of function except by the will and the power and the direction and the control of this creator. This is what theists believe, and this is what Muslims believe. Now, in the introduction of the book, now we finished the preface written by Roy Abraham Varghese. In the introduction written by Anthony Flew himself, I will quote from the introduction. In the introduction, Anthony Flew says that I have now been persuaded to present here what might be called my last will and testament. In brief, as the title says, I now believe there is a God. So this is Anthony Fleur's final testament, that he now believes in a God. Also, Anthony Fleur says in the introduction, for over 50 years I have not simply denied the existence of God, but also the existence of an afterlife. Now, Anthony Flew shows here that he changed his position with regards to his belief in God, but was still examining, but he still did not change his mind with regards to the afterlife. As I mentioned, he took the first step in the right direction, but he did not complete the journey, or did not have the time to complete the journey, because this transition happened in his 80s, just before his death. Also, he says, in addition, and as I mentioned, this transition didn't happen just suddenly. It took him 20 years of thinking, thought that was based on philosophical, logical principles and science. He says, in addition, over 2 decades ago, I retracted my earlier view that all human choices are determined entirely by physical causes. So, Anthony Flew retracted multiple views throughout his life with regards to views that were in support of atheism, and slowly he came closer to theism by believing in God, and that a human being has a free will. Now, Anthony Flew calls his journey back towards theism, which ended with him believing in God. He called it pilgrimage of reason. Pilgrimage of reason. He says, I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that this universe's intricate laws manifest what scientists have called the mind of God. Because this universe, every single atom or subatomic particle is governed by specific laws that you can calculate using mathematical equations. Who has set those rules? Who has placed every single particle under the control of these laws, that no particle can defy these laws? Why are these laws so precise? Why are they so much in harmony with each other to allow for the existence of life, for the existence of intelligence, for the existence of reason? What is this great mind that fashioned all this? He says also, I believe that life and reproduction originate in a divine source. He says, why do I believe this, given that I expounded and defended atheism for more than half a century? Now he gives the answer. He says, the short answer is this. This is the world picture as I see it, that has emerged from modern science. So it was the modern scientific discoveries, when he looked at these discoveries in light of the logical reasoning that he knows very well based on his on his strong philosophical background, being one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, he came to this conclusion. Now, he says 3 main points that science has proved to him, that he noticed in the scientific discoveries that led him to believe in God. He says these 3 dimensions of nature that point to God are: the first is the fact that nature obeys laws, and then he will expound each one of those in coming chapters, and as we go through this book, we will quote from what he has to say about these points. He says, number 1, the fact that nature obeys laws. The second is the dimension of life. Where did life come from? The dimension of life, of intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings, which arose from matter. Because for the longest time, for billions of years, there was just matter, dead matter, a cold universe, without any life in it. And then life started to show up. Plants, insects, complex life, mammals and so on. Where did this come from? And then human beings who have intellect and reason and intelligence and free will, all this came. Did it come from nothing? So it is such an amazing phenomenon that we have to ponder on. Also, the third is the very existence of nature. Where did all this come from? Because if you go back 13.8 billion years, which is the timing or the start point of the Big Bang, before that there was nothing. There was no time, there was no space, there was no matter, there was no energy. Suddenly everything came into being, and it came into being so organized. We will stop here and then we will continue to quote from this book, There Is a God by Anthony Flew, in coming videos. I'd like to keep the videos as short as possible so as to allow viewers to follow. Thank you very much.